Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for the standing ovation. That's the second time that's happened in my life. I had to pay for the first one.
Oh,
so
yeah?
that was
You
good.
can tell. What was that first one?
No, I just made that up, actually.
Yeah, how does that feel to get a standing ovation?
That's cool. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. This is unbelievable. So thank you. I'm humbled.
Thank you, guys. So Cam, how did it start? What was little Cam like?
The same proportions for a long time, and then I thinned out and went to college to play sports, and then I unthinned out again. So it was, so that's what little Cam was like. No, I don't know. Little Cam was curious, and some may say the word combative, but I think the word is probably more I just didn't take an answer just for the sake of taking an answer. It wasn't just good enough for somebody to tell me something. I almost felt like I had to, well, why? And I just kept asking why, probably way too much. And when my kids did it, it drove me bonkers, but I get it, so hopefully I wasn't too short a fuse with them.
And so when did you know you wanted to be a business owner?
I don't know that I ever made the choice of like, oh, I know I want to run a business. I just always remember feeling like it was important to me to kind of be in control of myself, and I don't mean that in like a weird way, in that like I never wanted a boss, but I always felt like maybe almost arrogantly that maybe I was, well, I mean, don't I know as much as you? I mean, my teachers literally like could not stand me.
So you were the kid asking why, and thinking you knew everything?
Yeah, I had a fourth grade teacher tell my mom I was gonna be nothing when I grew up, like I was gonna amount to nothing. It's hilarious, and I think my mom invited her to the Entrepreneur Awards when I won the Entrepreneur of the Year. I'm not joking. So it's I don't know the best way to explain it. Meaning, I always felt like I was interested in running a business, and I remember one time I had a business where I ironed clothes for a living. So these people would like drop off baskets of clothes at my house, and I would use my mom's ironing board and iron, and I would go buy starch. She'd take me to like Kmart or something, and I'd buy cans of starch, and I was like ironing clothes, and like that was a business, like for some reason. I don't know
How old
why.
were you when you were doing this? Is it you're like 18 or something?
No, I was like 12 or something. Yeah. I don't remember the exact age, but it was certainly just after we moved from one house to the other, so it's probably 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there.
So instead of playing Legos or something at a very early age, you knew, I want to have control over my destiny, and I want to go into this business world?
Yeah, well, I don't even know. Again, I don't think it was about business world as much about just being around things that, like, I don't know, I wasn't curious about ironing clothes, so it seems really weird because if you ask my wife, I don't think she thinks I've ever ironed anything. I use Barry Amas, right? I mean, but we lived in a really small town, and Diamonddale's a village of like 1,200 people on the river, and it's this really cool, almost like movie style, like little existence in the middle of nowhere. You have to drive through cornfields to get to it, yet we're only 7 miles from the capital of our state. So I always had this little small town existence out on my bikes. I mean, I wasn't just inside just doing nerdy stuff. In fact, I probably was the farthest thing from nerdy at any point, but I always was curious about, like, when the grocery store opened up across the street and had a little catering company there. Like, I went and I was like a dishwasher and a table clearer at at that place. And there was a printing company downtown, and I spent a couple of years working for Barry, doing like collating and running the saddle stitcher and learning how the cutters worked, and like just kind of learning the print businings. And what I knew about PMS inks when I was like 13 years old, and I just understood that process. And I was just curious, like, how does a printing industry work? How does a catering company work? How does, when I was, what was I, maybe 15, I think, 14 or 15, I got a job at the local hardware store. By far still one of my favorite jobs I ever had. And I don't know if it was even legal for them to hire me or even hand me keys, but I was like opening the hardware store on a Sunday, and these old guys would come in and say, hey, I need a Canuter bar, and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but what department is it? And they're like, oh, well, it's in plumbing and it's underneath this. So I'm like, well, here's the plumbing department. And I was just always curious about how that worked and what they were buying and what it fixed, and just this ever-present just world of just being, just why, and again, and I have no idea where that led to. I have 6 brothers and sisters, and I'm the most annoying of all of them, I'm sure. So, yeah.
And so you don't think your parents had a big influence on your entrepreneurial drive?
Well, I think that concept, it takes a village, right, to raise a kid, and literally I lived in a village. But my dad was a GM employee, and he was the classic GM employee of that era, and I don't even know what era officially. Maybe even started working there, right, in the 60s or 70s. But so he was gone for work long before I ever thought about getting up in the morning, right? He was gone at 5:30 for his coffee and work at 6 and home at 3:30, and I think he missed like one day of work in 30 years or something. It was just like that work ethic was unbelievable, and seeing that kind of, and I don't even know if you call it drive, it's just like, but that's just what it was, and that's how we did it. And when it was time to go work on the roof or to go do something, he just did it, and he just didn't really ask questions and kind of said, hey, come and help me do this, and he just did, kind of without reservation. And my mom worked for an educational software company, right? And so it's weird, she worked for a startup back in the 80s, before startups were kind of cool or what they were, but guys wearing Birkenstocks and wearing shorts and t-shirts to work, and Nerf guns, and no walls, and drywall just was like a swear word around that place. And it was just, there was the old buildings that were renovated that they were working in this little village. And so I was around this entrepreneurial climate growing up. At the same time, I was around this like just hardcore, and not that entrepreneurs don't work hard, obviously that's not the case, but this, one of the largest companies in the world, around a company that was trying to be big, and seeing kind of both sides of that was, I don't know, just completely enlightening. And I was just so lucky, to be a part of that, and actually working. Your mom works for a place like that, you get a chance to go there and work. And I was around. We were talking earlier. One of the guys from that company, one of the programmers, is here, and I remember kind of standing over his shoulder, and I'm sure he was just like, "Hey, 13-year-old kid, get out of here! I'm trying to program stuff." And he had like made computers with old ribbons, and I was curious how that worked, and I was down like, packaging up the software and making copies of floppy disks. You remember those square floppy disks? And I would like load the master in, and I would load all the copies in, and then I would insert those into sleeves and go learn how the shrink wrapper worked. And I don't know, it was just always around that kind of stuff, and people just fed it, which I think is cool. When kids ask questions, just feed them, right? Just give them the answers and don't shoo them off.
So it was a lot about curiosity when you were a kid, and you had the supportive environment from your parents,
Yeah.
and then and you were working and you were learning, and then you went off to college and you graduated, and then you started your own company?
Yeah, exactly, nothing like that. Like it was so weird. Like I'm working at the hardware store, and I remember in my bedroom, like the light switch was like broken, and it just kind of was crappy. And I remember like rewiring that myself as like some 15-year-old kid, like rewiring that. And then I just did all the outlets in my room, because we lived in this 100-year-old house. And so that, I think my parents were like, what the heck are you doing? Like, why were you doing that? And I don't know. So I was a camper. Like I grew up like going, caving and, going around Lake Superior and camping and hiking, backpacking, and I was an athlete. And so it was this weird mix. My Twitter handle is left and right, and I just think it's literally, I can't figure out which side of my brain I'm supposed to be using ever. But I did that. I always was interested in trying something new, and so I went away to college, purposely away. I mean, I went to West Virginia, and I hated college. I liked the experience, I liked the people, but I couldn't stand this concept. For me, I felt like it was, hey, how good are you at memorizing stuff? And I was terrible at memorizing stuff. To this day, I really have a bad memory about a lot of kinds of things like that. But so I gave that a shot for about a year and a half, quit school, drove back home in my 1985 Delta 88 that was loaded to everything. And it was before cell phones. You couldn't text or email anybody. I just remember calling my mom and saying, so I'll be home this weekend. I won't stay there long, and she's like, wait, what? So I went back for the second semester, and then was, gone kind of, I think, January or so. So came back, started working back at, I was working at Kinko's, which was actually a really cool experience for somebody who's curious, because I think Paul Orfalo, the way he crafted that business and kind of what it provided and kind of the problem solving methods that he had, was really cool experience for me to be, around. And I don't just mean like pressing the button and making copies, but literally I got a chance to work in all aspects of that business. And when I lived in Morgantown, I would see a fax. You guys remember what faxes are? I would see a fax come across, and they were looking for somebody to cover an overnight shift in Pittsburgh on Saturday night. And I'd like fax back, I'll take the shift, or I'd like Greenville, or Charleston. Like I was like just driving 2 or 3, 4 hours to pick up shifts just to go see those cities and explore those things. And but being around all that different stuff was great. So when I came back, I had a great home at Kinko's from a job that I had in late high school, and I was working there for about 6 months, and found out we were pregnant. My wife, the girlfriend then at the time, we were pregnant at 19, and it was I think probably it was August of '95, so it was almost 20 years ago. I was also DJing for a mobile DJ company, so I was making money at night. I was working for the Kinko's during the day, and it's funny because when I was in high school, I'd ask those guys if I could DJ for them, and they're like, "No, we're not sending some high school kid to DJ a sorority party," and that's probably the only reason I wanted to DJ, right? So I was DJing at night. I was working at Kinko's by day, and I was going into their small office to pick up a check from them every week. And it was a 400 square foot office, and it had 4 desks in it, and the one desk had like trash bags and like just stuff kind of piled up all over it. And I said to them, I think it was like late summer, "Hey guys, can I rent that desk and start a business in here?" And they're like, "Sure. What kind of business do you want to start?" I was like, "I want to start a design company." And the guys were great. It was Dave and Jerry from Jam and DJs, and they were entrepreneurs themselves, and really young at the time. And they said, "Sure." And I said, "Well, how much is rent? I can probably afford, I think I was, $100 a month or $200 a month." And they said, "Tell you what, if you answer the phones during the day when we're not here, we'll let you rent the space for free. And after a few months, we'll evaluate and see how you're doing." And I think, for those first couple years I was in business, I never paid them a penny in rent, but what I gave them was an open, active office during the day for them to come in and run their business at night. And I was the master at learning the kind of information brides needed for weddings, right? I mean, I was like, "Oh, Jam and DJs, thanks for calling," and I'm taking this stuff and then putting it down and designing my, stuff. But it was weird. They incubated me long before I think anybody knew in my world, right, what incubation was. And the same thing goes for the other people I was surrounded by when I started that business. And those, longer stories about people in the industry, which was great.
So when you started that business, you I think you kind of breezed by the fact you said you and your wife were pregnant.
Oh yeah.
And you're working like 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
And you decided to toss into that you're going to start a company.
Yeah, sure, right. So I knew I wanted to start a company, and I knew that meant I had to quit my other job. So before I quit the job, I hurried up and went and bought a car with a pay stub. So I remember, I went to Saturn and bought this really fancy SL2, right? And so I bought this car, and then I totally quit my job.
You didn't want your credit to dry up, right?
Right, right. So I bought a car, quit it, quit the job. We moved into a house, and then had a baby like 3 months later.
Well, so I figured 3 months, your life just turned upside down, and you're working all the time. And,
totally, yeah.
And now you've got bills to pay, and what's life like then?
At that time?
Yeah, at that time, and then to walk back when you made the decision to start a company, juxtaposing what you thought versus what reality was. Was it where you thought it would be, or?
No, I think all I knew I wanted to do was solve problems, like design-wise, right? And not that I knew that I could solve all the world's problems, but I knew that I was in this position to, or I felt like I was in this position to be better at it than other things I had seen. And so, and not that I had a bad experience working for somebody else, because it was just a key-op job at Kinko's, or working in the computer department. So it wasn't like a terrible job. It just wasn't funding what I wanted to be able to do. So started the business, was still DJing 6, 7 nights a week, sometimes on a Saturday doing 2 shows at a time. But just I was became way less active, gained a ton of weight, had a ton of stress for that first couple of years. And really had no idea what the heck I was doing, right? I mean, how do you know what you're supposed to be doing? You've never really worked for anybody in that industry. Like, it just seemed really, I look back now, it was just kind of really stupid,
And what was that like for your wife? Do you have a sense of her perspective when you're probably stressed out and you're working all these jobs, you're probably not getting a lot of sleep? I don't know if I'd be cranky if I don't get my 8 hours. I'm cranky.
She is amazing, and she's still married to me, so bless her, right? And we've had 2 more kids, and they're just unbelievable, and her support about anything. Like, I literally have gone home a few times and said something like, "Oh, I just bought a building," and she'll be like, "Oh, great," or "We're gonna do this," or I just started a publishing company, we're gonna do magazines. She's like, "Wait, what?" But it never comes from a point of negativity. It's always, she just knows that kind of stuff is what feeds me and keeps me happy and stuff. And so that level of her support is just unbelievable. And I think that without having somebody like that, I think it would be way harder to do the kind of stuff that I've done. And at the same time, and I was kind of joking about it earlier, I think I'm such a workaholic that without her, I probably would have killed myself with work, maybe too much, because I literally would just work all the time probably. And so this level of balance that I think her and the family provides me and literally forces me to leave, and even though sometimes it's frustrating and stressful to not be and do, just do what I need to do. At the same time, I absolutely think family is first, and spend more time doing that now than I did in the beginning. And that was a problem. And I look back, again, in business 20 years now, I really wish the first 5 to 10 years I would have spent way more time with family and worried less about the business. But again, I was just I still, 19 years later, still feel like I'm in, fight or flight mode. Like I have bills to pay. Literally payroll is tomorrow, right? I mean, it's just, I know when that happens.
Well, I was going to say that looking back, it could be easy to say, I wish I would have spent more time with family, because you know how the story goes, 20 years later.
Yeah.
But I kind of wonder, like, at that time, could you have really made that decision? Because I feel like it might have been risky, if you would have spent less time building the business. Maybe sometimes it feels like you're in an ocean and you need to keep your head above water. I mean, do you think, looking back, that you actually do really wish you would have spent more time?
I really
with your
do wish I
family?
would have spent more time with the family, and I think it just comes down to working smarter and not harder. And you're right. At that point, I wasn't equipped to understand the difference. And the only thing I can think of is I wish I would have spent more time trying to understand that difference, or learn, or would have maybe not started my business at 19, but maybe started it at 21 or 22, and spent more time around people that could give me that kind of balance or guidance. And but I learn all the time. I mean, I learn every day, and I love the absorption of that. But I remember a couple years into the business, a guy looked at me, and he was a client, and and this is so stupid. I don't remember what I did. I'm sure I spent like a whole day working on something, and I gave him an invoice for like $60, and he's just like, "You kid." And I remember he wrote me a check for like $200, and he's like, "This is so worth like $200." And he goes, "And if you don't mind, a couple other things. You should just lose the earring," because I had like this one earring in my left ear, because that's what people did back in the early 90s, And he goes, "And you should probably stop DJing at night." Because at this point, it was a long project that kind of got to this point. And he goes, just focus on your business. Like, focus on what you know how to do. Quit working on making money for somebody else. Like, that's actually a crutch for you. Let the crutch go, and just literally just be free, and just go and just dive in and do it. And you'll find that money will show up just because of, you're fully committed at that point. It says going to work at 8 or 9 in the morning, working until 5 or 6 at night, going home, eating dinner with Lisa and Alec, and then going and getting in a DJ van and driving to Ann Arbor or Grand Rapids or whatever and doing a show, and then coming back at 3 or 4 in the morning. I mean, I gained a ton of weight eating too many, Doritos and milk chocolate, and but again, I didn't know what like healthy was. I was a college athlete like body, and I had anything I ate in the early days just disappeared anyway. So that was a horrible time,
So you had the earring, and you had the Doritos.
It was bad, yeah.
And you had a company, but it sounds like maybe the DJing was what was paying the bills,
Yeah.
and then the company was kind of maybe like your extra or something like that.
Yeah, well, yeah. And at one, I literally just shut it off. I just quit.
So you turned off the main spigot, and you said, "I'm going to go on this thing that's like."
Yeah, that was probably the first biggest leaping off point, aside of buying a car and then moving into a house and quitting a job, kind of all in the same couple of weeks. But so that was the next point. And I feel like 20 years in, I feel like every few years there's some point, or there's some level of points that have become kind of defining moments, or choices, or things that you do that allow you to kind of really focus on what's going to make you now, and what's going to make your business what it is.
Was it hard to make that decision to turn off your cash flow and focus on your business?
No, I'm a hopeless optimistic, and I think anybody I spend time with will, that it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? I'll be in a meeting for something for our film festival, and I'll just look at the crew and be like, "Oh, that's what we're gonna do," and they'll be like, "Yeah, good idea, bro. Settle down. That probably is not gonna work that way." I'm like, "Yeah, but it could," and so but that's how I treat almost anything. Yeah, but it could, really.
And so that was a pivotal point for your company, and things really changed after that?
Yeah, and I think that, changed in that I was able to just really commit to that. And I think, there's this kind of sentiment now, the whole fail hard, fail fast, fail often thing. I don't subscribe to that maybe in the same way maybe other people are thinking about it, as just like, you know, you're 22, you can still go back to your mom's house if you need to. Yeah, let's just try it. And if I run out of food money, I just got something to fall back on, and I failed, and who cares? But the way I was doing it was I was kind of preparing for not failing, meaning I think it's almost better if you can't fall back. It's easier to be successful when you don't feel like there's a crutch back there. And so that was a weird lesson that I took on that I didn't really understand was a lesson at the time. But where am I going to fall back on? Hey, Mom, can me and my wife or girlfriend at the time move into your house with a kid? Like I was not okay with that. I had a huge sense of pride in kind of providing and being, you know, what I was. So I think that's a lesson that, again, sometimes you don't know those lessons until you're kind of in the middle of them or look back and realize that those are just moments of that. And again, I don't mean to take away from I'm not saying people shouldn't go out and try something because there may be failure. Are you kidding? I work with entrepreneurs every single day. Try it. And if it doesn't work, that's cool. But don't not try something because, or try it purposely to fail. I just don't understand that. Why would you even try something if you weren't going to try to make it successful?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm misunderstanding their whole point, but that's just, again, the hopeless optimistic in me, right? I don't know.
And so that was, you felt like your business leveled up at that point. You're focusing exclusively on Jamin Designs?
Yeah, at the
Is that what you
time,
called it at the time?
yeah. Again, this is my third company name officially, but that one was terrible. It didn't really represent anything. I literally just took somebody else's, business name and made the word design out of it because they had productions and studios and DJs, and I was like, oh, I'll be the design person of that. We were all independent people, though, so it didn't make any sense. I didn't really know as much about branding, obviously, as I thought I did at that time, and have learned a lot more since.
Why is that a terrible brand? Because to me, that sounds cool. It's like jamming. The business is jamming. Everything's
yeah,
cool.
because
We're jamming out designs.
I wasn't really a great designer, right? I mean, that really wasn't what I set out to do. I thought I was a good designer, but I realized actually fairly quickly I wasn't a great designer. I was just good at solving problems visually, visual communication stuff. And so that's really more was what I was able to tell stories through design, and not necessarily, I'm a terrible illustrator. Like personally, I can't illustrate anything, but I know how to art direct something or how to creative direct something. And that's what I realized I was better at, running the business of being a creative space. And as I hired people and more people and got my first true designer, I just remember sitting there watching him design stuff going, oh my God, I don't know anything. He was unbelievable. So I think it was literally from that point on, that was another learning point for me, that I hired this kid. He was fresh out of school and he was an unbelievable designer. I'm like, all right, from now on, I am hiring people that are way better at me than that. So I was designing our first websites, and then I hired a real programmer. I was like, what? You can do that stuff? I was just blown away, and I loved it. So I've only hired great programmers, or great people that are great at dealing with project management or things like that.
So I want to touch back on that. You said that was a terrible name. So I'm going to start a company this weekend. Mm-hmm. How should I think about what do I name my company? How do I know if I have a good name or if I have a terrible name?
You don't. It doesn't really matter what you call yourself. It really doesn't. And it's funny because I sell that service of helping people name themselves, or helping people build identities around their brands and kind of what they do. And so, it does matter. The bottom line is you shouldn't do something that contradicts, right? You shouldn't put yourself into a position that contradicts what you're going to be offering or how you're going to do it. Doesn't mean you have to be neutral enough to take on any kind of business as time goes, but we went through the transition from Jamin Design to Vision Creative, and then I reached a point where I was ready for a new identity. I knew I was going to create a new logo, a new collateral, a new marketing stuff to kind of reposition who we were, and I had a good friend that I had met when I was out judging some advertising stuff, and he was just like, you know what, have your staff take you through your own creative brief. Have them ask you all those questions you ask your clients. It's really fun exercise, but it sucks. And I was just like, why does it suck? And he goes, you'll know, but just do it. And I remember we got halfway through the creative brief. I think it was only 45 minutes in, and I was just like, my name, this is horrible. It was the worst thing ever. And it was just because the name
This
Vision.
is your second name you're saying.
Yeah, Vision Creative at that point. I was like, wait, so we sell these random ideas, there's these visionary ideas, and that's not what we did. We helped people, put their rubber to the road and just move things and really get people to take action upon the stuff that they were doing. And so I reached back out to the same friend, and he's kind of giggling. He's like, yeah. And he goes, so what do you think the new name of your business should be? And I was like, I don't know, but it's got to have something that has more action. He goes, how about traction? I was just like, wait, what? And so I no. And then 6 months later, I called him back. I was like, man, I think that's actually accidentally it. And so he was like, no way. So anyway, it was this weird like, Valley Girl conversation, of course, but so it happened something like that. And then I finally decided to do it, and then it took about another 6 months to actually put it together and convince myself that it was okay to reposition who we were fundamentally after 15 years of equity, right, of being who we were. And
yeah, because I think when Ford went through the crisis, I think they put their oval, I think, on the line with their bank to get maybe borrow like. I don't know. Maybe he's gonna drive somewhere, huh?
Yeah.
So I think they put their oval as their line of credit, and I think it was they borrowed $20 billion, I believe. So they had a lot of brand equity built up,
Yeah.
and it sounds like that was that. What you're doing is just throwing away your brand equity.
Well, I felt, yeah.
That you built up
some
what,
people
over
were
15
saying,
years
right.
at that point.
So I went through a point where, I have friends or people I was doing business with are like, "You're crazy. You're throwing away all this equity." And other people are like, "Oh, that's great. I love it." And I could tell you this really long, fun story. I'll tell you afterwards. It's not really for the camera, but it's more of an anecdotal story about, like, this guy has a. Yeah, I don't want to get into the story.
That'll be in the extended interview.
There you go, right? So that's the bonus. It's $1.99 online, right? No, but I remember thinking, does it really matter? I mean, and in my industry, meaning the people that were already doing business with us knew who we were and were engaging with us, and the people that had done business with the past, if they weren't doing business with at that time, does it really matter? Like, and people that hadn't committed to ever using us even after 15 years, what was going to make them start now? And that was the whole point of me changing our position in the market. Was actually things were great. I had just taken on new employees and kind of refocused the kind of services that we did and what we were offering, and I was ready to communicate about it in a different way. And so I thought, well, if I sell this to other people. I sell this to 100-year-old organizations or 50-year-old businesses or new startups. Like, if I can't do for us what I do for them, then how good are we, right? So we just did it ourselves, and it was fun, and I don't think at any point it was ever painful. It was actually a little bit freeing and little confidence, and yeah, we were totally comfortable doing it.
Were you scared of pulling that trigger? Do you think that might kill your company?
No, not at all. No.
Always fearless.
Yeah, I don't know, in a way. Again, just go back to if they didn't know about us, then I wasn't doing something right in terms of getting myself in front of them. So we went through the kind of the positioning of who we were, so that it felt better about being more confident about talking about what we could do and putting that stuff on the line.
As business owners, what does our brand do for us, and how do we know if it's not working? How do we know it's time to rebrand or continue on?
Well, usually people spend a lot of money to learn that from me. No, I'm just kidding. If your business isn't doing what you wanted it to do, meaning if people are coming to you for the wrong things, right? I mean, people were calling me and saying, "How much is it for a 5-page brochure?" And I'm going, "What? Am I pricing a brochure? That's not what we sell." Or, "How much is it for a 10-page website?" I'm like, we're not creating enough to tell the story of kind of who we are and what we're selling if they're asking us those wrong questions. So, whether you're if you cut hair for a living, are you a barber, or are you a hair stylist, or are you a hair color? Like, you have to be way more upfront about what you do and how you do it, and confident, and worry more about that a narrow focus instead of casting a wide net. So too many times when I ask people in a creative brief, like, "Oh, well, who's your target audience?" And they say, "Oh, decision maker." Well, of course, but is the decision maker male or female, right? Are they old or young? Are they educated or not educated? You have to know way more about who you're talking to. So in that, how do you know if your brand is working or not? I mean, are you making as much money as you need, or are you working with the people that you want to work with? And if you're not, you got some shifting to do.
Yeah, it sounds like you knew from the calls that were coming in, people were asking you questions, and if I was a barber,
Yeah.
and people are calling me asking to get their tires changed, then my message isn't resonating and people don't understand what I do. So then that you're missing out on an opportunity. In addition to that, it's slowing down your sales pipeline because people are asking the wrong questions.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to the barber model, if you're going to be a classic old school barber, be really proud of that and be totally comfortable with that is what we offer and how we do it, and this is the experience you're going to get. And so you may have a finite audience of people, but if you have 100% of that finite audience because you're so laser focused on like approaching them and being visible to them and being in the right spot and providing the right kind of service, other people are going to see that success and they're going to want to be a part of that. Like, oh, where do you get your haircut? That looks really great. And I may not be interested in that same style, but clearly you're confident in that, and I'm going to go to that same place. And I think that this whole, casting a wide net, everybody's your audience methodology can be really dangerous, because then you're literally just part of the same noise everybody else is. So yeah, it's a tough game, but I think back to like what Apple did, and Steve Jobs when he came, back from Next, and they're like, oh, well, not everybody's gonna have a home computer. And he's like, I don't care. Like 7% of the computer buyers are creative services. If I have 100% of that market, we're gonna be successful. And that statistic is totally crap. I don't know, right? 37% of statistics are made up on the spot, something like that.
Are you making one up right now?
Totally. But essentially that was his message. If we have 100% of the creative users, we're not going to fail as a company. So let's focus on those people that are independent thinkers, creative people, and then other people are going to see that and they're going to want to be a part of it. So there was a culture at a point where you were really proud to have an Apple sticker if you were a designer, or if you owned a creative business of some kind. And no offense to the fact where it's at now, but in a little ways, when you see an Apple sticker now, you're not really sure who that person is, because other people they want to be a part of that culture, and now that culture includes music players and phones and so many other things. It's a wider culture, but boy, they're really good at each of those markets and creating that independence amongst people.
So I want to switch gears and go back to something you said before about hiring people and hiring people who are smarter than you. How do you know when it's the right time to hire your first employee? When you're,
to me, and any time we do this and we add somebody, it's when you're literally busting at the seams and you're kind of out of resources of being able to provide that. And I mean that in a way that I never hire somebody with this premise that I'm okay with letting them go in 6 months if it doesn't work out. I just take it way too personally, and that might be why my business is the size that it is. I think it's more the size it is because I really appreciate and enjoy the business of the business. I like being in the creative industry. I like communicating with people about that and being a part of those conversations and the creative. So I don't want a company of 30 to 40 people or even 50 to 100 people. That's just not what I'm interested in, because then at that point I'm managing revenues for investors and paying things back, and just I'm managing people, and that's not what I want to do. So I've spent enough time traveling, working in this industry, being at judging advertising awards with other people that are the gray hairs of the industry, and hearing them say things like, yeah, I had a 100-person firm in New York City, and now I'm out in Vermont, and there's like 8 of us, and I love it. And I've heard enough of those stories of the people that really love the craft of being in that creative industry and the services of what we do, that they love it with under 10. And so I purposely keep it that size. But I remember those early days of like trying to figure out, like, when is it time to hire somebody, and how am I going to be okay if I hire them and then they don't have enough, I don't have enough work to provide for them, and so I got to let them go. Well, to me, that's heartbreaking. So I treat that as though they're part of my family. And so when I bring them on, boy, that's the whole not having a net to fall back on. I can't imagine failing to the point and not letting them have their paycheck. And so I just work extra hard to make sure they're all provided for.
Have you ever had to let anyone go?
No.
In 20 years, you never had to let anyone go?
Not for financial reasons. I've had to let people go because they were doing a really poor job, or treating people poorly. And usually I just let them figure that out. I ask them a certain series of questions, and they're just kind of like, I literally had somebody just stand up and go, right, I should probably just get my stuff and go. I'm like, yeah, it's probably a good idea. But I've never said, you're fired, get out of here. I don't turn that tyrant. It's either a fit or it's not. But I think that speaks to how I hire people too. Right? I hire for culture first. I hire because I like you and I think you're going to get along in my office space, and I think that you're really going to enjoy the environment that I provide you. I don't pay more than everybody in town, right? That's not how I bring people in. I don't just throw those kinds of things at them. In fact, I applaud my people for working for probably less money than they would get somewhere else, but I'm also super proud of the culture that we have, and the support and the love and the creativity they get being around each other and that provides a great value. And because I make sacrifices of the kind of work I take on, I don't just take on crap work just to make money. They know that. We only take on work if it fits us also. And so there's a level of being in that kind of environment and trust that I think adds the value of what we do and how we offer it, and not having to, let people go like that.
Yeah, I think that does speak a lot to who you are as a company. When I worked at some consultancies in Detroit and Chicago, I don't know if a month went by where somebody didn't get fired.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. I have a hard time with that, and it's probably a fault, right? It's just one of those faults that I just deal with.
So you survived the 08 recession and you didn't have to cut back or let anybody go.
I will confidently say we had no problems during the recession, only because we were really only working with the leaders in each of those industries. I've never felt, and I hear consultants in my industry say all the time, focus, right? Be really good automotive, or be really good at hospitality, be really good at that. And it's the same thing like all my teachers. I'm like, yeah, well, you know what you're talking about, right? So I purposely, I think we provide a better value because we work across multiple industries, right? We work with old nonprofits, and we work with, startup bakers, and we work with really sound, we work with a concept car manufacturer that it's like we have this complete diverse set of people that we get to interact with kind of all the time, and the value that brings. But at the same time, I only work with people in those industries when they're really good in their industries, so kind of they're industry leaders. So when the recession happened, they were actually taking advantage of the fact that other businesses in their industries were struggling, and they were spending as much money or more, right? So the better restaurants or the better, businesses than the commercial services side of stuff, and they were doing great, and which meant it was still going well for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we were really lucky to be positioned that way.
So I've heard a lot of people in the audience are starting their own companies or thinking about starting their companies. And I know one of the big roadblocks, we can put these roadblocks up. Like when I went to start my company, I wanted to make sure that I had a lot of money in the bank. So in case I didn't make money for a year or two, that I'd be okay.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you need a lot of money in the bank to start a company?
No, I don't. I mean, it depends on the kind of company you're starting. I'm getting ready to start another company as well. And that one, we're literally making the decision: are we going to bootstrap this portion of it, or are we going to create something with value and get investors to actually bring it complete and take it to market? And I bought my building without having any money, right? Again, I didn't know any better. I just thought you shook a guy's hand and you signed a land contract and he told you he'd loan you some money to renovate it, and then you run out of money and you borrow some more, and then you just kind of wait and you do all the work yourself, and then all of a sudden you're in this office, and this is how it works, right? So I don't really know any better. A lot of times I get myself in these situations, just don't ask, right? Just do it. So yeah, I didn't wait to have money to start my business. I was 19 and had a car debt, and you
didn't have a trust fund or anything back then?
No, at all. I didn't come from a family that had those kinds of resources at all. So
what was your bank account like when you started your company?
$300. Yeah, and an old computer. It was kind of stupid. I started designing on that computer. But I had $300. But I just knew that, hey, I'll work again this weekend and get a little more cash next week and cover that. And it's like anytime I've had that ability to grow, I would get a deposit, like a big project would come in and I need to hire somebody, I would get a deposit that would cover at least a couple, paychecks of their time, knowing that we would produce some stuff and get some more cash. So I effectively bootstrapped my way to, 7 or 8 employees at one time, and just had that, I don't know, bravado maybe is the right word for it. I don't know what it's called. It's just dumbness. I just kind of blindly moved forward and just kind of charged forward with it. But it completely depends on the kind of business. I'm effectively a manpower business I don't really have hard assets that I need to buy other than a computer, and provide space for people to be creative and produce. We sell gray matter, so it's very different than selling objects or some really cool, technology pieces.
I just lost my train of thought.
Uh-oh.
I'm getting so lost up in your story.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I remember now. So you said that you took deposits from your customers, so
Right.
you knew that you'd have cash in the bank to pay. That's really smart, 'cause I think a lot of people don't realize that you can get money up front. They think everything has to be after 30 days, and then companies end up floating a lot of their clients.
Yeah.
It's gonna be hard to do when you're starting up.
We end up floating a lot of our clients too, on accident, or because they're cheating us, or they have no intention to complete a project. I even had a guy in the last couple of years commit to a project, gave me his deposit on his American Express, And then a few months later decided he didn't want to do the project anymore, and he called American Express and challenged the dispute, even though he had the technology in his hands. And I had no way to fight it. I didn't have the resources to do it, and he basically stole $5,000 from me, and that's a lot of money, to take from a small business. And he's still here in town, and but it happens, right? I mean, those
Makes the dinner parties awkward, huh?
What's that?
Makes the dinner parties
It
awkward.
makes running into his wife awkward. Yeah, he doesn't come around where I'm at anymore. But and not that I'm going to beat him up. There's no I don't hostility. I just shame on you, man. Why would you do that to a guy who has a small business and a small family? So you just, you go into almost every relationship, even though you get things signed and you have these contracts. There's still people with either bad intentions or misinformation on how they should be treating you as a vendor. So but the other thing that we don't do as a creative firm is, and somebody's actually just giving me crap about this today on the phone. He called me. He's like, yeah, I know so-and-so didn't want to do business with you because you wouldn't give him a bunch of free ideas, but I'm still with you. I still get that. But we don't comp ideas. We don't just give you ideas and hope you like it and then pay us later. We're going to solve your problem, right? So you're going to commit this much money for us to solve your problem. You're going to give us this much on the front side so that we can invest the appropriate amount of time and resources and energy into thinking about it and concepting it and sketching it and designing it and giving it to you. And you're going to fund that portion, and then you're going to fund the next piece. And so, I think, again, in the services business, it may be a little bit different if you have hard costs on the front side. But just, we don't give anything away. That doesn't make any sense for us unless it's in a charitable format, and that's when we do.
It sounds like you've done a really good job over the years of managing your cash flow since you never had to let anybody go.
Yeah, no.
No?
No, I mean, I'd like to think that I do, but business, small business or even big business is all about cash flow. You have got to keep your mind to it, right? And so there was, I'm 20 years in now, and I think I have a bookkeeper who comes in every Wednesday, and I think I didn't hire her until about 7 or 8 years ago. She comes in every Wednesday morning now. She has her pile of stuff that she goes through and she fills it all out. But before I hired her, I would get to a point where I was completely out of money, and then I would look over at these completed project folders. Remember, they were blue 11 by 17 sheets of paper. They're just kind of folded in half, and sometimes I'd have a stack of them this high, 15, 20, 30 jobs complete. And I remember I used to pick through them on a Thursday night and go, I need to make an invoice for this one because I know that person can pay me tomorrow. So I'd make an invoice that night, and I'd call him in the morning and be like, hey, so can I bring that invoice over and get paid? And the guy would be like, oh, you did that project 2 months ago. And I'm like, I know. But I sometimes would go 2, 3, 4 months before I would actually create an invoice. Terrible way to do it. So I hired her, and so then invoices got created every week. And so it was a total shift in even managing the business from that side of it.
Were those some scary times? It sounds like you almost did run out of money a few times.
Oh, I did run out of money quite a few times. And it was those people that had trusted enough in what we did, and they're like, yeah, we were just waiting for you to bring us the invoice, right? Or then unfortunately you have clients like Michigan State, so if some of the bigger invoices were for them, you'd create the invoice and drive it over to their payables office, and Tom would look at you and go, well, we'll cut a check in about 30 to 45 days. I mean, but that's just the process of the bigger businesses. So yeah, not wise to do that if all your things are tied up in that big process stuff, but yeah.
Are there any other mistakes besides not getting that bookkeeper on earlier that you that almost were lethal to your company?
Having official contracts, legal contracts. I used to just literally do everything from a handshake, and I think the contracts more put us in a position to be a little bit more hold ourselves accountable for deliverables and hold the clients accountable for those deliverables and who's going to achieve what by kind of which time frame and at which point are things completed or not. Scope creep is a terrible, it's a terrible thing for creative services firms.
What is scope creep?
Scope creep. Hey, will you, for lack of better terms, will you make me a 5-page website? Yeah, and then the project's all done and it's 23 pages. Well, you didn't tell me it'd be any more. It's well, but you kept giving me more than the 5 pages we talked about. Well, yeah, but you should have told me it was more. It's I had enough of those conversations, so we finally figured out the right way to write contracts and agreements. And I think the biggest piece of advice for that stuff is just do what you do well and hire people that know what they do well. Hire an accountant, hire a lawyer, spend the money. You almost can't afford not to do those things. I've been burned on some really significant dollars over the years from just not managing that process of the business right. So, and also not preparing for the things that could come up in your world outside of your control. I've had a couple major kind of health things happen in our family that literally you just have no, if you hadn't created the capacity to deal with those things, how are you going to manage it, right? What's the emergency plan? I had a baby born, and I get a phone call from the doctor's office, my wife, and she's like, you got to meet me at the hospital. And next thing you know, I'm kind of gone for like a couple months, like a baby having open heart surgeries, and you're just like, what? And you're trusting your staff to manage things that you didn't have in place. Like, are you prepared for those kinds of emergencies and the kind of time that you may need to take away? It's like, have you built, are you working on a business, or are you working in the business, right? And sometimes I find myself kind of more often than not kind of in the business, and then realizing I have to kind of get back out on top and look at how it's ran. Are you running it so that I build myself a job, or did I build a business that can exist? And so I think we're at the point now that if I did have to disappear from my staff for moments of time, which I've had to do unfortunately in the last couple of years quite a bit with something else, but the business existed, right? And it sustained, and it did great, and my staff was amazing, and it's because I armed them different, and I built that system a little bit different.
Yes, it sounds like maybe not mistakes, but just things that were surprised you, and it probably speaks to your team and culture that they were able to handle those situations when they came up.
Yeah, well, again, I was a dumb 19-year-old kid who started a business. I had no guidepost for it other than seeing, of a successful 100-person, startup or business grow from 7 to 100 people kind of in front of my eyes. But from the ages of, I don't remember how old I was when the thing started, but I was younger than 10. I was probably, 7, 8, 9 when that thing got going. I wasn't tuning into those kind of business decisions. I was just tuning into the culture of how the place worked and how it was there. So I wasn't old enough to understand that you had to have those kinds of things in place. Even down to things like life insurance, right? It seems really silly, but what happens if I get hit by a bus, right? What happens to my family or the business or the buildings or how is all that stuff managed? You just kind of easily, it doesn't matter, but it does matter. If you have other people involved in your world, you have to have that stuff sorted out.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing your struggles. What I want to do too now is open up for questions. We'll take questions up here at the microphone if you guys want to make a line up here, Malik. And while we're getting that line up there, we talked about some of the mistakes that you made. What's one thing that you did really well that you would recommend to people that are starting or growing their business that they do?
Don't create a business that requires you to be the only person with answers. I feel like I know the culture that we have in our business, and I almost sometimes yell at my staff to do this more, but don't build a system where people have to come to you and ask for permission. It slows things way down, and you don't necessarily provide or create an opportunity to have an environment where people are solving problems and making things maybe bigger than what they could be for you. So the culture that we have built is if we have a problem to solve or an issue that's come up, think about in the capacity that you're in, right, and my staff, when they have an issue in front of them, think about how you would solve that and why it would be beneficial to us and the customer. Like, it's got to be mutually beneficial. And then come to me with, hey, here's the situation we have, and here are a couple ways that we could tackle those, and here's the way I think is best, and here's why, right? So it's maybe more work for them, but again, it creates a sense of ownership, and it creates a sense of pride in what we do. They're not just doing what I tell them. Like, that just makes no sense. And I think it's because I never wanted to work in a place where, and that's maybe why I never want to work for somebody, just go do this. Because I would literally look at them and go, why? Why would we do that? Why is that important? Go back to Kinko's. You weren't allowed to have the word no, right? It was never a negative, not no colored paper here or no staples. It was please remove staples or please do this or please put this over there. It was the opposite of no. It was more...
Sounds like it's like empowering your...
It was more empowering to be, and when I asked, well, why is that important? And, and they'd have these conference calls with Paul Orfala, the founder, and I would listen in on those things or kind of see or read things about him, and it was just that he didn't like the concept of people telling him it made you uncomfortable. So create an environment where people can be comfortable and decision making, and I feel like that adds value to their workday.
So it's like empowering the employees and then making them almost consultants where they present you with a list of solutions and the recommended solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Malik, you have a question?
Hi, yes. No disrespect, but I'm missing a gap in your story. You started your business in the DJ office, and you said your goal and what you were good at was solving problems, but at some point in time you had to basically draw something. and you said you weren't that good at it. How did you didn't go to school for this? How did you learn to create that final product where somebody had something tangible in their hand that solved that problem?
Yeah, so I did spend time, at my youth. Again, my mom worked for this educational software company. We had computers in our home. They were Macs. We had design software on them, and I was in high school. I was designing stuff, and I went to college. I had a computer set up in my dorm room. I was designing stuff, and I worked in the design department there. So I was around the design industry. So I've never had a formal class in software, like how to use software. But I would literally look at something that, like, at Kinko's, it was cool. People would bring in, people would either bring in their entire hard drives, or they would bring in MiQuest disks, or they would say, can you print off these proofs? And this is the workaholic in me, right? They would leave, and I'd have a copy of the proof sitting there. And I remember I would open up the design software and try to emulate that. Like, how did they do that? And so I would try to learn and mimic good design, or how do you make the software do that? And is that Photoshop, or is that freehand? It was called freehand before it was Illustrator, but all this freehand. So working in those, in Adobe, PageMaker. I mean, in my high school, I designed, was the desktop editor of our high school yearbook, which was all digital. It was one of the first ones in the country to be submitted digital. So I was around that environment of the creative services, and that's why I felt like I could solve problems through design, even though I wasn't a great illustrator. You can be a great graphic designer and not be a great illustrator. So.
You almost took a musician approach to it, though. You saw, basically, you heard a song, and then you were like, well, how do you dissected it?
Well, I was curious, right?
Right.
And that feeds that kind of curiosity feeds musicians. I can't play any instrument right now. I was the double French horn player in 7th grade, I think, but other than that, I've got no musical capability.
Well, I'm just using a parallel. That's what it sounds like to me.
Right.
You were able to visually see it, and then you were trying to emulate it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's where I learned the art of good typography, or the art of good color balance, and then again, surround myself with. I'd go to conferences and I would read things, and I spent a ton of time learning the craft of the craft, and again, understanding the business of of positioning brands, and again, spending time out in the world learning, reading, and that stuff. So.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for sharing all that stuff with us. That's amazing. You touched on employees and team building a little bit, and you talked about how culture is really important to you. But one thing that I think Traction does amazing is get incredible talent in the same place. And I was wondering if you could give more words of wisdom, I guess, on how you find such incredible people, and how you keep them around for so long, and how you give them what they want while getting stuff from them at the same time.
Yeah, thanks for the compliment. And I think my staff would thank you for the compliment too, obviously. And I feel like they are the most creative people in town. I hunt, right? I hunt for them. Two of the most creative people I ever hired, I hunted out of North Dakota. I was in that state working. I saw some work that was beautifully done, and I figured out who did it, and just kind of called him. I was like, hey, you want to come to Michigan and work? And he's like, no, I'm like, well, why not? And then he didn't, he wasn't even interested at the time. And then I called him about 10 months later. I had a different job open up and said the same thing. And he goes, it's funny, my girlfriend, she was ready to jump in the car and go the last time she heard that you made the offer of just even considering it. And he says, so yeah, I'll come out. So he flew out and saw us. And so I think it's, and said yes, obviously. But I think it just comes down to, and I take pride in the fact that I don't just have people that are from this community, and I don't mean this disrespectful at all, but retreads, people that just didn't work out where they were, and so they're just kind of job hunting. I don't take on those people. I really take people who understand the craft of the role that I'm going to hire them in, and talk to them about what they value in the craft, and what they value about their work environment and expectations, and what they want out of it. And I think it's through those conversations, and not the traditional kind of interview. And I honestly can't think of the last time I really read a resume. I get them all the time, and when I'm hiring people, I'd rather them talk to me about it. And I probably break some rules about like not really doing background checks and stuff like that. But I think that kind of the cultural fit is just so important. And I have to talk to a lot of people to find that cultural fit. I have a position open right now that's been open for several months. I can't find the right person that just quite feels right yet. And it's not necessarily a skill set. It's more than that. And I don't know how to describe what that is. That's really hard. But it speaks back to the decision making and the empowering them to feel like they have control over how things kind of work in our office without them necessarily. They don't have to make decisions about running the business, but I don't show anything to a client unless they can convince me or sell to me why it's valuable. But at the same time, I never go all salesman on them and come back and go, the client says they want that green, so make it green. Like, no way. Why is that important? Who's that going to affect? And I think I treat our environment and the products that we create, I treat my employees the same way, the same kind of care. I think that's where it's important to me.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good question. Maybe let's do 2 more questions in 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
All right, Cameron, thanks a lot for coming and sharing your story. As a fellow creative, I'm hoping this question actually covers all different types of industries, but it's, for me in particular, this is a curiosity. In a town this size where an entrepreneur is likely launching a business that competes with former employers or even friends in related businesses, how do you approach going after your ideal client when it's likely somebody that's being serviced by somebody you already respect, admire, or have worked with?
Yeah, I think respect is a gigantic word there, right? And I've had some wonderful employees taken from me by actual clients, right? And that is not comfortable, but I get it. It's business. So I think this, people ask me all the time, who's your competition? And no disrespect for the other creatives that are in this town, because I think there are some really wonderful creatives in this town. I don't think my competition is me, right? If I'm not providing an environment that's enriching to them, if my customers are willing to go somewhere else, that means I haven't provided them with the kind of service or quality that they need. And so I think if I lose an employee, right, or if I lose a business, shame on me, because I wasn't working hard enough to maintain that. I don't think anything in this world is given to you, right? And again, I look at like my, the role models I had in my parents. There were two completely different paths, but my dad went straight from high school to work in GM, and he had to work really hard in his role. And I know there's a lot of stigmas one way or the other about that, but there's a lot of really hard-working people that were a part of that kind of culture. And I don't think anything's given. Somebody joked earlier about how the stuff that I give my kids, but you know what? I demand a lot out of them too, right? I mean, I'm a very giving father, but at the same time, and I'm a very giving employer. But at the same time, man, you better work hard to earn it and show that you respect that environment. Because if you don't respect my employees, and if I don't respect my clients, and if I don't respect my vendors, your business isn't going to last very long. And if it is, you're going to cycle through every relationship you have, and what else do you have left, right? I mean, my name and my pride, I was talking to David about this earlier, when it's all said and done, the most important thing to me is my name and my reputation. And I may be slow paying a bill because I'm not so good at like chasing down the people that owe me to pay that bill, but you're never going to challenge that the work we didn't give you or wasn't with love and thoughtfulness and insight. And I think that's really, really important. Yeah, thanks.
Last question.
Hey Cam, thanks for talking to us. I just had a question, and it's kind of like on the other side of the spectrum. When do you decide like to give back? Because I consider myself a creative, and I like to select a few projects a year that I'm like, this is really going to help a lot of people. Because like I feel like marketing especially is like just been taken so dark side. It's like use this spray on deodorant and an avalanche of women will attack you, and it's like that's a lie. Like, so it's like, when do you personally like, how do you select what pro bono or back to the public kind of projects that you and Traction take on? Thanks.
So, yeah, I have an illness, and it's not able to say no.
Everybody asks Cam for free work.
Oh, man. Even paying clients do. I think that as a company, you have to determine the value. Like, you have to determine what's going to make you feel better as a person and what that means like to you. And so I give a lot to the Ronald McDonald House charities and to the house here in town, because we had to live at a Ronald McDonald House in another community, and it meant the world to us. And so I felt like the more I can give to that kind of environment, to let other people have that same loving experience that I did, is really important. I grew up going to Impression 5 Science Center, and I think that just fed my curiosity as much as anything in this town. So I give back to Impression 5 Science Center because I think it's important to feed more people with that kind of curiosity and interest, and I think that's a really important thing for me. And then things like the Capital City Film Festival, which I helped, put together with some amazing people in this town. And why we give our time to that is because I think it helps our community be a better community, right? I think it brings in more. I think it opens people's minds to the fact that there are like fun people around here and creative people around here, and there's great energy and love for music and film and the other creative things that we do. But I also give to high school things, and I give to whatever, and I think that you give as much as you can without causing fail. And I think I've had a great experience. Jessica in my office loves challenging me on how much I say yes to everything with great balance, because she helps our operational stuff, but she helps us understand kind of where is that value going to be, and can we even afford to do it? I mean, there's a level of you can't give something you don't have as well, right? So there's a great guy moved back to town here with a lot of money, and people told him, you give too much, and he's like, hold on, let me choose what is too much, right? And that's right. And I just think it's up to what makes you feel you. And for me, I find it important to make a community that I want my employees to be a part of and want to be here in this town for. And I also choose to help create a community or give to a community that makes my kids maybe want to move back here someday. Even I want them to go explore the world, but maybe someday come back and be a part of this town. And I just think that, I feel like it's my responsibility to be a part of that, creating culture, exposing culture, and just creating a place that people really want to be.
That's awesome, and Cam does give back a lot to the community. For those who don't know, he does the Capital City Film Festival, and he coaches high school soccer. I'm sure he does a variety of other things. He's on the Impression 5 board, so he does a lot. And an example of that is him being here at Startup Grind. So let's all give him a warm round of applause for him coming out.
Thanks.